Hello, bonjour, habari. My name is Paul Curry. I'm the manager of the Urban Systems Unit with LoCS4Africa, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to our session entitled All Together Now, Mobilizing Public Resources for Integrated Infrastructure Solutions, as part of the LoCS4Africa Virtual Congress 2020. As a reminder, the way that you use our LoCS4Africa platform is on the right of your screen. You can see a control box where you can select translation if it's available. We can learn more about the session and our speakers today. You can ask questions or input chat into the question box and receive answers. I encourage you now to share with us your name, organization, and something that you would be intrigued to learn about in this session. We also invite you after the session to explore the LoCS platform. We are pleased to announce our 5th Local Climate Solutions for Africa Virtual Congress with the theme of Financing for Change. Yesterday, we had our opening ceremony, which had some wonderful inputs from a vast variety of speakers. And we've highlighted 3 here from our Minister of Environment in the Republic of Rwanda, saying we as a country recognize the urgency of responding to climate change within this decade of action. From the head of the Unit for Sustainable Energy and Climate Change in the Director for International Cooperation and Development in the European Commission, the EU External Investment Plan, which is already operational, is expected to generate up to 44 billion euros of additional investment in Africa for low carbon and resilient infrastructure. And finally, from the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, perhaps nowhere is the work of climate action more important than in our cities. This is where the climate battle will be won or lost. As a reminder, LoCS4Africa follows 4 tracks, looking at energy, infrastructure, and eco-mobility, research, development, and innovation, managing risk and harnessing nature-based solutions, and Nexus and circularity in urban systems, which is the track that we are in. There are 3 cross-cutting themes of COVID-19 recovery, gender equality, and multi-level governance. And therefore, we think you would be interested in these upcoming sessions on November 9th and 10th and November 11th. And we'll share these again at the end of our session. So the core question that this session is seeking to explore is how can public funding approaches allow for the realization of more cross-cutting sustainability solutions? We are really pleased to share that it is sponsored by the Urban Low Emission Development Project, which has been active since 2012, and now in a 2nd phase project funded by the European Commission with UN Habitat and LoCS4Africa as the implementing partners. It's implemented with 65 cities across South Africa, Rwanda, Bangladesh, Colombia, Laos, Indonesia, Brazil, India, and Europe. And the main focus areas are on mainstreaming low emission development strategies into cities, building capacity to access climate finance, and supporting enhanced multi-level governance. So it's my pleasure to lead us into this session by welcoming our esteemed moderator, Luke Nakaja, who is President of Governance and Policies for Sustainable Development. So over to you, Luke, and can I ask our speakers to turn on their videos so we can engage further.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning to you all. We welcome you to this session. Silos are indeed comfort zone for everyone, including for finance and investment decision makers. Nexus has emerged as a powerful concept among sustainability discourses to break silo, break the walls, because of its explicit articulation of the interdependencies between systems. Working within silo is inefficient and ineffective, and Nexus actually is a call to move out of the comfort zone. However, while the concept began with a motivation to improve food, energy, and water security for all, this has shifted towards a technical approach that focuses on resource optimization rather than on integration approaches for social well-being, being vertical or horizontal integration. Further, Nexus theory, which promotes integration of sectors, is in tension with public administration approaches, which separate department, funding lines, and mandates, making integrated approaches difficult for local government. But purposeful mobilization of public finance tools such as own revenue generation, strategy-based budgeting, and sustainable procurement, public procurement can support effective investment in infrastructure solutions as well as integrated implementation. And in this session, the question will be how changing our funding approaches can allow for the realization of more sustained and cross-cutting sustainability solutions. Particularly, we will look at how finance can drive a shift from project-based, champion-led approaches towards more programmatic, long-term processes, which slowly add and reinforce cross-sectoral integration. We have, ladies and gentlemen, 5 terrific panelists, and I'm very pleased to be the moderator of a panel that is so well gender balanced. We have Mr. José Pupin de Oliveira. José Pupin de Oliveira is a faculty member of Fundação Getúlio Vargas and is also a chair professor, invited chair professor or visiting chair professor at the Fudan University in China. We also have from the Gambia, Mrs. Fatou Jiba. Fatou Jiba is the director of local governance at the Ministry of Local Government in the Gambia. She's a seasoned development worker with a vast experience in local governance and decentralization. We have Mrs. Zantia Limberg, and Mrs. Zantia is currently the mayoral committee member for water and waste of the city of Cape Town in South Africa. She also sits on the Planning Appeal Advisory Panel. We also have Mrs. Marike Stan Vaden. Marike is the Director of Business Development at ICLE. She heads the global approach of ICLE for integrated solution climate action. Last but not least, we have Mr. Ben Mokheseng. Ben is the head of the transaction for municipalities and water boards at the Development Bank of South Africa, DBSA. And prior to joining DBSA, Ben worked for National Treasury as a development finance practitioner, where he ensured that development finance institutions adhere to the government policy objective in a financially sustainable manner. As you can see, we have all that it takes to cover the subject. And of course, we look forward to hearing from you who are welcome to put your question before the panelists. So to start, we will hear from Mr. Pupin de Oliveira on a very key way of introducing this subject. What are the capabilities and enabling factors required for implementing Nexus in cities? Jose, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Luke and then ICLE for the invitation to be with you today. For me, it's kind of early in the morning, but I think it's worth wake up 5 in the morning to share with you some of our work. It said that I work for FGV, that's a higher education think tank in Brazil, but also part of the result I'm showing here is an international project that also ICLE is one of the partners called Understanding Innovative Innovation Initiatives for Governing Food, Water, Energy Nexus in City. That's a project that you are working now and try to understand those connections. Initially, as all you probably know, the demand for water, food, energy is going to increase a lot in the next 30 years. Not only on that, but you have, because of climate change and other global disturbance in both political as well as natural, there are high risk of security of supply. It means you need to get a lot of those supplies, particularly in city, from external sources. Most of the city, I would say, depend on external suppliers of these three components: food, water, energy. And also from the research you're doing cities around the world, and very few cities, they actually have any governance leverage over these three components. It means three very important components for, I would say, life, well-being, and the economic activities in the city, but few cities, they actually control most of those supplies. Supplies sometimes come from outside, from other cities, sometimes from other countries, and they rely a lot on security, those issues, on other actors that they don't have much leverage on that. And with this risk, the idea of Nexus is exactly trying to understand how we make better connection and more efficient and use of those resources, also innovate in the way you see those resources, particularly using green and blue infrastructure. This is the context of working to try to catalyze, I would say, support both financial but other kinds of resources to improve nexus in cities and make cities more secure on those three components. And the idea of capabilities and enable environment is basically linked to innovate and learn. You know, how these capabilities, most of the city, you have to basically learn from different sources, both internal sources, own resources, but also external sources. Most of the time, you're going to see that the external sources are very important. In Africa, particularly, there is a reason the drivers of these initiatives, particularly those innovations. This is a survey we did with more than 100 clay cities, and you divide by continents, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. You see that Africa actually has a very different motivation for starting those innovations. Most of the time, the innovations in Africa is to provide food, water, fiber, and fuel source, energy, you know, these three components, while the other continents have different motivations. And this is important that put in this context, Africa, in general, a lot of the innovations come from this need to provide these three components that's important for the life. A lot of times, the different reasons, because these also generate a lot of jobs in cities where the jobs are needed, and they go for these kinds of initiatives. And when you think at it conceptually, just to put this graph, you see like there are a lot of solutions to the local problems and solutions to the global problems like climate change and biodiversity loss. And the two ellipses on the top, they show basically there is an intersection. Not all solutions to local problems are also solutions to the global problems. There is sometimes a trade-off. And more than that, look at this technically though, but when you look at economic and political and social viability, you see there is a limitation of those solutions. You would like to be right here in the middle of the tree, where I have solution to local problem like jobs or income, but also climate change, at the same time be economic and politically viable. And the idea of learning is exactly increase this middle area. You know, we can increase learning kind of technically, you can increase the range of solutions you have for global problems, and also range of solutions for local problems. At the same time, you can span the feasibility, political, economic feasibility through public policy, access to market, citizen engagement, co-production, and so on. This is the idea of creating capabilities to innovate, increase the, I would say, technical range of solutions, but also enable environment, I would say, public policy, market, and citizen, that these solutions are more likely to occur. And you see that this is another, the same survey, more than 100 cities from Italy. You look at from where cities learn, what the sources of learning. You see also the external organizations are very important for the learning environment for the city, but also internal organizations. Particularly in Africa, you see a lot of foreign organizations involved in the innovation, both through technical, but also financing some of those initiatives. And in terms of finance, now how to make those innovations more likely, and we see three kinds, I would say, for mechanisms that for finance. First, you see those kinds of innovations that make economic financial sense locally, and they will be done voluntarily by companies, governments, local association, formal sector. You see those initiatives happening. A lot of times, you know, for urban agriculture is one of those initiatives. You see a lot of urban agriculture all across Africa, exactly because it makes economic financial sense, not much money to invest, but also feeling as a good opportunity for economic opportunities of financial sense. You see the second, that sometimes make economic sense locally, but not financially, means there is no source to actually need to invest first. You don't have this source of finance. And in this case, basically, we need some kind of credit to develop those initiatives. And finally, the third kind is that there is no economic or financial sense locally. It means those kinds of initiatives, they will only happen if you create innovative financial and economic mechanisms like payment for ecosystem service, tax transfer for different kinds of climate resilient initiative, carbon credits, and so on. And these three kinds are those, if you leave just for as it is now, business as usual, most of the time you just get things on the top. And basically you need to strain the initiatives on the bottom, the last one. And this, you see a lot of those mechanisms, as mentioned, particularly collaboration, other sources of funding beyond the traditional budget, with multilateral governance, you know, sources coming from other countries or other levels of governance. Also collaboration between stakeholder, public and private, the initiative that only these three organizations supporting the initiative can happen in many cases. And finally, I also see a lot of cross-sectoral, you know, collaboration with education department or health department, and link it to climate resiliency. And this is an important part to bring finance, but also in-kind resources for a lot of those activities, because this department, a lot of times they have a lot of resources in the budget, and these resources can be used for different means. And finally, I'd like to thank you, just say that this initial research that you find out more about those mechanisms, how those financial innovation happen, and from where city learn to actually access a lot of those mechanisms and make things that are not economic and financial viable can become with this innovation. And just to stop here and give back to Dr. Luke. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose. You have used almost your 10 minutes, but I will still take one question for you. You have actually started by saying that cities rely on external suppliers for water, food, energy. This actually is calling for a governance approach to funding that should go beyond city walls. It might certainly need to go to look at what is happening at the hinterland where mostly the water will come from. How will the Nexus work here in that regard? And what might be the trade-off that you use in precisely changing the funding mechanisms that are in place?
Yes, thank you for the question. Basically, as you said, a lot of this hinterland, it needs mechanisms of governance between the city and from where, for example, the water or food comes from. And this can create it through political means. You've seen this consortium of municipalities where they create this mechanism to govern these resources jointly, and also transfer the resource like payment. I've seen payment for ecosystem service for water, like one municipality actually supporting another municipality to keep the water reservoir for the supply with payments. These actually create a financial source for the city who receives to create incentives and also innovations to keep that reservoir proper for consumption for the city, for example. And I see these mechanisms, the political economic mechanisms, are very important, linking the city and the hinterland. And you need sometimes high level of government for state or federal government to create those political and economic mechanisms to make cities to collaborate in kind of more multi-level governance.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Mrs. Fatou Jiba to actually respond to this question. How are you decentralizing national government financial responsibilities to local level? This is almost about vertical integration that will help to use the Nexus approach in improving investment at local level. The floor is yours, Fatou.
Thank you so much, and good morning from the Gambia. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this very important session. The government of the Gambia is working with UNCDF in implementing a project called the Job Skills and Finance. One of the mechanisms we are using to implement this project is the LoCA, which is Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, which we are using currently in the Gambia with the support of the UNCDF. So in the Gambia, it's a small country, like you said, just a little bit background on Gambia. With a population of 1.7, the poverty rate at 48.4, climate change related challenges that we are facing in this small country are as follows: change in participation patterns, increased intensity or frequency of floods here and there, and drought, land use and land cover change, sea level rise, which in fact our capital city is threatened, salinity intrusion, and coastal erosion. This is just a small background as far as climate change is concerned with the Gambia. These are some of the pictures depicting those issues that I highlighted in the previous slides. If you can see, the first picture is the tourism development area, which is very threatened with climate increase, the sea level rise and coastal erosion. Looking at the drought nature of the country where farmers depend mainly on agriculture. So all these are pictures depicting the challenges we are facing as far as climate change is concerned in the Gambia. The job skills and finance for women, like I said, we are implementing this program with the support of the UNCDF, using local as our mechanism to reach out to the population. So what does this mean? Local stabilizes the country's economy, social and security situations through social inclusion and employment of both women and youth, with specific emphasis on promoting gender and addressing climate change. All the activities that we are implementing as far as local is concerned, women and youth are in the forefront of our activities. Currently, we are implementing this program in 32 wards. That's the target for the program. But we started with two main regions. Those are the local government areas, where 8 wards in each of these local government areas were selected for a pilot phase. So, but in total, we are targeting 32 wards for the 4-year program with UNCDF. How do we do this? We prioritize investment are delivered through cash for work programs for youth and women and procurement to local, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, thus creating jobs for all these people. We really work with youth, women, and equally targeting the local, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Any project or investment that the community want to invest on, we equally give priority to the local base SMS to apply, so that equally we create jobs for women. Women and youth are in the forefront. Whatever we do, all the unskilled labors are done by women. So the menu of investment, which was aligned with the local investment priorities, are these 6 major areas that we have highlighted. 1 is agroforestry, 2, water and sanitation and health, 4, energy efficiency and security with adaptation benefits. The 4th one is the climate proving infrastructural development and bioclimate construction. The 5th is the climate smart agriculture and agroforestry. So these are basically the 6 main menus where all the investments are aligned to as far as our local program is concerned in the Gambia. Implementing the local level climate adaptation and addressing multiple needs. Like I said, currently, we are working, we started in 2019 working in 2 regions, but currently we have expanded to another 2 regions, making it 4 local government authorities. And the target, like I said, is 32 WDCs. WDC means Ward Development Committees, which are our decentralized structures at the local level to enable us to reach the grassroots people. So these structures have been in place since the commencement of the decentralization program in the Gambia. These structures, there is another layer of structure under this, which we call the village development committees. But here we focus on the WDCs as the entry point to each of the wards. To have access to finance to implement climate change adaptation through local, like I said, which is performance-based climate resilient grants. It is a flexible mechanism which is geared to meeting local needs. Like I said, climate smart agriculture, water and sanitation, energy efficiency, agro processing, climate proofing of infrastructure in line with community needs. We just give them the menu as a guide, but they choose what type of investment they want to go in for, and they go in. It's a flexible mechanism that we are using. So, like I said, the advantage of using local in the Gambia, and we have really seen that one key advantage is empowering women and youth. The local mechanism in the Gambia has integrated gender in its design. Any activity or any investment, there is that gender equality taken into consideration. The Cash for Work component has also promoted financial inclusion for women and youth through increased access to bank accounts. Most of these women will tell you they have never been to the banks. They don't have an account. They don't know how bank transactions are even done. But with the local, they now have access to bank accounts. Each of the women and youth participating in these activities have been linked with banks so that they have their individual accounts where their monies are paid to ensure that they have a savings at the end of the day. So they have, it has really increased access to bank accounts as far as the rural people are concerned. Again, bank loans. If you have an account with any of the banks, like the local banks or any commercial banks, the tendency of having loan is very high. Equally, the business activity. We want to inculcate the culture of women and youth involving in business activities. If you have an account where you have money deposited, obviously before leaving it lying there, you tend to invest it in business. This is what we are encouraging them, so that at the end of the program, they are able to invest in businesses to develop their local economy. The culture of savings. Like I said, we don't pay them directly the money for cash for work. It's paid directly through their account, so that at the end of the day, the tendency of using all the money, if directly paid to you, will be reduced. But if we have an account, we encourage them as much as possible not to withdraw all what they have been paid for, but to ensure that there is some little savings kept for the family, kept for the businesses that you will be engaged in for future use. So this is very important as far as Gambia is concerned, and we are really happy, being part of this whole program. The other advantage is the creation of jobs for youth and women. Like I said, the main target is women and youth, and equally jobs have been created in the construction of local infrastructure, climate change, agriculture, and rehabilitation of the ecosystem through Cash for Work. All the unskilled labor, even the skilled labor, they get them through because the contractor will come with minimum manpower, but will use the local people to ensure that he implements the project with them so that they learn the skills of doing some of those things along the line. So currently we have 384 beneficiaries who are working in this program. 192 are men and 192 are women. It's 50-50. Created in LRR, that's the other region that we are operating, and in the North Bank region of the Gambia. So with combined skills development and access to finance, local has really stimulated the green local economies and job creation in the Gambia. Again, the advantage, another advantage of the local is to promote good governance and participatory approach. The people themselves decide what type of investment they do, just with little technical support and facilitation to ensure that they participate in all the aspects from planning to implementation of those investment projects that they will be identifying. So this builds the capacity of the local structures by promoting good governance and participatory approach in our whole system. This is very important. As you can see some of the pictures, this was a community meeting where they were consulted in identifying their priority investment. So in local citizens.
I will need you here to, yes, I will call on you here to conclude because you are now over 12 minutes and we still have a few questions for you.
Yeah, this is the last slide and the others are just pictures. So like I said, the local in the Gambia has really promoted good governance and participatory approach in our whole development process. So some of the pictures, happy women participating in the Cast for Work activities. So I thank you all for giving us the opportunity to participate in this very important session. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatou. Just one question, and then we will have more for you coming from our viewers. To what extent the performance-based climate resilient grant mechanism, to what extent it has improved or contributed to transforming the fiscal transfer system from national government to local government? To what extent it has improved this? If you can put your response to 1 minute, that would be great.
I beg your pardon again, please.
To what extent the use of the performance-based resilient grant mechanism in the Gambia to bringing funding to local level to precisely doing such projects like job skills and finance for women and youth, to what extent it has actually secured and improved the fiscal transfer system from national government to local government in the Gambia?
My network is really unstable.
Okay.
The voice is being cracked. Yes, maybe if Nyanya is around to support, the network is unstable. Nyanya can keep in.
Nyanya, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Luke. I think, yes, for your answer, what we've seen in the Gambia before implementing local is that central government budget doesn't consider local. And in as much that they collect the revenues and should give back, they are not incorporated in the central budget. So with local, what it has done is supported the government for the first time to include the local government sort of regions that we are working with in their central budget. So monies are passed through the central budget and they further transfer it to the local government. And what that does is now is the government is looking at how to use this local mechanism to also sort of implement automated revenue sharing system where revenues that are being collected by central government and provide whatever they need to give to the local government. So it's a great mechanism that's supporting the decentralization process in the Gambia. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyanya. Our next contributor is Mrs. Zantia Lindberg, and she will actually elaborate on two questions. How do we change the system while we depend on it? That's a very good one, I think. Our own revenue generation models are tied to excessive consumption to be financially viable. How are we using rates to enable more integrated infrastructure solutions? Mrs. Lindberg, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm joining you from Cape Town, South Africa. And in order to respond to this particular topic and answer your specific questions, I would like to reflect on an actual real life and very relevant example, and that is the most recent drought that Cape Town has experienced. I think many are familiar that Cape Town has, over the past few years, been in the grip of the most severe and protracted drought in recorded history. Scientists have classified this as a 1 in 590-year event. And during the peak of the drought, water consumption had to be driven down. And this was achieved through a combination of savings by residents, pushed via multifaceted communication campaigns, and by technical interventions such as aggressive pressure management, amongst many other interventions. Collectively, Cape Town managed to reduce consumption by almost 60% in world record-breaking time, which resulted in Cape Town being formally acknowledged by the World Water Association and recognized as the global water saving capital. But the added challenge, however, was that the overall reduction of consumption and the significant reduction of high-level consumption, which is where the city receives and generates the bulk of its revenue, placed the previous tariff structure under severe strain and increased risks. The city had to make structural changes to the tariff structure, which included the implementation of a uniform tariff more closely aligned to the actual cost of water, as the previous level of cross-subsidization was no longer viable. Many experts in the field of water and finance has stated previously during the prior drought period that the price of Cape Town's water was far too low to ensure stable service. And so when consumption dropped significantly during the height of the drought, there was naturally a significant drop in the income needed to provide the service. It is obviously common practice worldwide to make water more expensive during times of scarcity, both to safeguard a stable income required to deliver the service and to deter high levels of consumption. And continuing to provide a free allocation to all residents and retaining the objectively undervalued pricing was no longer sustainable for Cape Town. And meanwhile, the city was also pursuing alternative emergency water supply sources, including things such as tapping into different aquifers within the city, exploring desalination and the purification of used water. And these are undoubtedly all costly projects that typically are not within the municipal ambit. It thus became crucial that a new tariff model was needed, one that was not solely reliant on volumes of water consumed. Thus, the fixed charge component of the tariff was implemented, ensuring some measure of assured income not vulnerable to the effects of climate variability or fluctuating consumption patterns. The cost of providing water, I think most importantly, that needs to be acknowledged, remains relatively the same because one needs to continue maintaining the infrastructure that provides the service. And this is not dependent on volumes of water passing through the system, from the point of raw water purchases to treatment to drinking water standards through the reticulation network into our homes, into our bodies, and ultimately down the toilet and onto our wastewater treatment plants. Each of these processes and more require income in order to operate. And in Cape Town's particular context, we have quite an extensive water and sanitation reticulation infrastructure to support. And during the water crisis years, the added complexity was that many Cape Townians installed boreholes and well points and have to a certain extent gone off the grid. And there's no income from consumptive water tariffs from these persons or entities, although they are required to pay the fixed charge due to continued use of sanitation infrastructure and services. And such permanent interventions to reduce reliance on the municipal supply have contributed to the overall reduction in the sale of municipal water, which is currently about 30% lower than pre-drought levels. So the fixed portion of the tariff, which the city introduced, contributes around 20 to 25% of the income needed to maintain basic infrastructure and continue delivering the service. Dams supplying Cape Town are now currently full as they were in 2014, but climate change modeling represents a fairly grim picture for our future rainfall. And the city's response to this lies in our water strategy developed during the drought. It represents a very ambitious roadmap designed to steer Cape Town away from being in a precarious water security position again. And the cost of water augmentation projects in our strategy designed to deliver more than 300 million liters of water a day over the next 10 years will obviously contribute and add an additional capital expenditure burden for the city. Furthermore, an additional significant capital investment is also planned in our wastewater treatment infrastructure, all to be funded through a combination of both grant, loan funding, and tariffs. There are also parts of the service, such as stormwater, which is funded by municipal property rates, which obviously releases the burden on water tariffs. And the investment in stormwater is integral to developing clean urban waterways and reaching a water-sensitive status, which is one of the commitments of the city's water strategy. So just as diversification of water supply sources are required for future sustainability and water security for our city, so are the financing sources for the financial sustainability of the 75 billion Rand asset base, which supports our water and sanitation service, and the operating budget of over 7 billion Rand and capital program of approximately 40 billion Rand for the next 10 years will be funded through a hybrid of financing sources. Alternative methods of charging sanitation are also being investigated to be de-linked from consumption. And the city is also exploring designing a rainless day fund in which reserves are set aside for the city to use in rainless years so that the entire burden does not need to be passed on to customers. In the South African context as well, the Municipal Management Finance Act guides how and where the municipalities can spend municipal funding. This is limited to spending within your municipal boundaries, but Cape Town, like many other municipalities, receives the bulk of its water outside of its municipal boundaries. And so it is in our interest to ensure that there's optimal management of these catchments, but we are not able to spend municipal funding to assist with the management of these catchments. And so through innovative funding exploration initiatives, the city has joined what is called the Cape Town Water Fund, which is made up of a partnership of other users within the catchment, commercial, private, and NGO stakeholders, each one contributing to this fund that has greater flexibility to have money redirected to the management of these catchments, particularly for the removal of alien invasive species to ensure that we increase and maximize rainfall and the flow of rainfall into these dams within these different catchment areas. And so this is one of the many examples in which the city is exploring alternative funding mechanisms that are not dependent on consumption. But in closing, because the tariff model was restructured during the height of the drought, and the fixed charge, which I alluded to, was then described by residents as being a drought tax, and there's still quite a negative connotation around the restructuring of our tariffs and a lot of dissatisfaction, we are still committed to ongoing communication campaigns directed to our residents in order to bring about greater awareness and collective knowledge about the complete value chain of this precious resource and what the city's water tariff contributes towards the entire infrastructure network. So in closing, I would like to share a video which we have done. It's an example of many videos that we have done as we continue on our water security and water sensitive journey, knowing and understanding that we need to bring our residents on board as they still form an important base of revenue generation to support the service. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to the video.
When you open a tap, you know your water has been treated and tested by specialists to make sure it's clean and safe. When you open a tap, you know your water is top quality and sourced from rain-fed dams and groundwater. When you open a tap, you know that we're investing in new water sources to help secure future water supply. When you open a tap, you know your wastewater is treated so you can stay healthy. When you open a tap, you know that there are informal households all over our city that are able to open one too. When you open a tap, you know that your water is affordable at just 4 cents per litre compared to the 10 Rand you pay for a litre of bottled water. When you open a tap, you know that your children and grandchildren will be able to open one too, because our infrastructure is being continuously developed and maintained to produce great water now and in the future. When you and 4 million residents open a tap, we know that without your contribution, it wouldn't be possible. Thanks to you, our water is clean, safe, reliable, and available for all.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Lindbergh. Thank you, Zantia, for your contribution. Just a quick question before we proceed. You may remember that Jose have said that African cities tend to learn not from their neighboring colleagues managing the cities, but from abroad. To what extent do you think that the experience of Cape Town has been actually a learning ground for other cities in South Africa and even in the region, because drought is a challenge and will even become worse in the future?
So the drought has taught us many lessons, and we've used the crisis to hone in on those lessons and apply it to map a different water future for Cape Town. We have made it very clear that we are continuing to learn, not only from other international cities, but during the drought, we did make the effort to also learn from other neighboring cities and countries within our continent. And we remain open to sharing what we have learned and how we are taking on those learnings and adapting for the future. And we believe that we want to continue sharing what we have learned and how we have translated those learnings into actions to empower and assist and support municipalities that are contending with the very same challenges. Because I think that by learning from one another, we save time and resources by understanding the complexities in greater detail, by also not committing expensive mistakes along the way. And so there should be a far more open and transparent relationship between municipalities across continents, because essentially we are all challenged with very similar issues. And I think that we can benefit from tapping into those experiences.
Thank you, Zantia. Now, my question will be now to Jose. Jose, you have said that we can open the opportunity for improving local sustainability, global sustainability, and economic viability through learning. Now, how do you see the case and the lessons learned, including in policy transformation in Cape Town? How do you see this being taken to other African cities, knowing that in policy making, most of the African policy makers are rather extravert, looking for lessons from outside? Jose?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, I think the best learning is learning from someone closer to you. And this you have found that more easy to adapt because you have the same environment, enabling environment. If you try to like very high-tech solution from somewhere, sometimes very difficult to bring to your situation. And I see a lot of learning happen basically through city-to-city cooperation. These you have seen organizations like ICLEI and others. Also, there are some national organizations of cities. They are very important to share those lessons. Also, you have seen a lot of opportunities to national governments to understand better and learn those innovations and try to use their resources, sometimes much larger than local governments, to spread those innovations to other places. We have seen these in other situations as well.
Thank you, Jose. Now I will give the floor to our next presenter. It is Mrs. Marieke van Staden. Marieke is, as you may remember, the person who heads ICLEI's global approach to integrated climate action. And the question to you, Marieke, is how can we leverage global financing for local climate initiative, particularly integrated infrastructure development? Over to you, Marieke.
Many thanks, Luke. And thank you, ICLEI-Africa, also for inviting me to speak and share also from a global perspective. If we look at the topic of the conference, local climate action in Africa, and we bring finance into the space, which is an absolute critical element to be able to deal with climate action, scale up our work that we need to do in our cities, towns, and rural areas. The focus on all together, I find an interesting entry point. So I would like to focus on that particular piece, looking at leadership, continuity, impact, and support. And if you allow me, I would like to focus on specifically the role of local governments in leading and driving the sustainable development agenda, but understanding that the climate impacts need to be dealt with. We need to be more resilient at the local level. We need to make sure that we break through the silos. Luke, as you mentioned before, this is an important piece because our sectoral approaches can no longer be siloed. We need to think and bring energy and transport, waste, sanitation, bring things together, understand the potential solutions also for infrastructure development or infrastructure rebuilding or redesign. And there, I think the continuity component, looking at local development plans, which typically are the norm in many countries now, bringing your mid to long-term focus, getting continuity on climate action is important. And that's where investors start becoming interested. If they see political continuity of plans, there's stability, and a framework in which one could invest soundly. Of course, investors, whether public or private, are interested in impact. They want to have a good investment that in some cases ideally has a return on investment, but let's look at public finance. Public finance is a scarce commodity. It's a precious commodity, and we need to be clever when we invest in local climate actions, climate activities, climate infrastructure. We also need to make sure that that funding is investing in local jobs, improved air quality, benefiting the local community. So there are many different angles that we could look into. Considering now we're in a climate emergency, we need to make sure that when we design infrastructure, we need to carefully understand what is the impact of climate change and the potential to adapt and enhance the resilience of that infrastructure. ICLEI started working on climate action 30 years ago, but our access to finance work is more recent. We accelerated our focus on finance in 2015 through the Transformative Actions Program. And we created the TAP, in brief, to tap the potential of local demand. We've listened to our members, to our network of subnational governments, that there is clearly a problem in them accessing finance, in them accessing support, technical assistance to also design local climate projects. And we created the TAP to deal with that issue. So our focus is very much on enabling the space. And through the TAP, we have created a project pipeline that opens annually. So we take intake projects from local and regional governments and their partners that deal with climate action. But these projects need to be transformative. We're not just looking for just another project. We're looking for projects that can really scale up climate action, better serve the community, build resilience, adapt to climate change, and also, of course, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this means switching to clean fuels, sustainable energy, renewable energy, looking at large transport projects, potentially also with your neighboring community. The integration that we talk and working together is not just beyond the silos, but also neighbors, towns, cities, and regions in a particular area that work together to also scale up and reach the level of investment that banks and other investors are actually interested in. The scale to tackle climate change is massive, and our response needs to be coherent and measured in that sense. So our TAP pipeline, and watch that space because we'll open it a little bit later in November again, and we warmly invite all of you to consider submitting projects from any part of the world. Any city, town, or region may submit their projects. At the moment, we also then partner with at least, we have 14 other partners who can all deliver particular services. So we're working in a broader network in partnership. Also, UNCDF was mentioned. We're working with UN Habitat, so with other platforms as well to access that sustainable technical support that we can provide to the local government level. The second piece, very briefly, we are very interested in better understanding local investment needs. We know the amount is massive, but we also invite all subnational governments to, through their annual reporting to the CDP ICLEI Unified Reporting System, please tag your actions that are already funded and where that funding comes from, or if you're seeking finance, because we can potentially then pull your project into the TAP pipeline and try and support you to access finance and technical assistance as well. There was this mention of learning and sharing between peers, also from different parts of the world. That is also something we can do through your reporting to find cities and towns with similar problems and challenges so that we can facilitate that conversation and the shared learning as well. The last point, very briefly, you might be aware that the GAP Fund was launched very recently. So this is an interesting technical assistance facility that was launched. The long name is the City Climate Finance GAP Fund, and it was launched to support climate smart urban development. The main funders, the initiative is launched by the German government and the government of Luxembourg, together with the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and C40 and ICLEI are supporting partners of this initiative. This is a very interesting space to watch. So if you have a project, feel free to put it into the TAP pipeline and we can support you to put it and pitch your proposal to the GAP Fund for technical assistance in order to build a more robust project concept. So this is in the pre-phase where we know you have a very good idea, you know what you want to achieve, but you have not designed your project to be bankable yet or investable yet. So those are three options that we invite and are open and available to support your communities. Let's get things moving. We have to work together in this space. Thanks, Luc, and back to you.
Thank you, Marike. We all know that $50,000 for instance, could make a big difference in the budget of a city in Africa. But it's not easy to mobilize $50,000, let's say, from a global funder. But that's the most of the scale of the financial need for most of African cities. Can you report here that the global funders have learned to address those type of level of needs, rather small scale financial need of African cities? Can you report that this is now being done and easy for African cities?
Sadly, no. The donors and the banks and the finance space want large projects. They have not understood that at the local level, the smaller projects are just as important. We are talking to the financial institutions to see maybe one could bundle projects. So take a couple of cities in a region or in a country and have them all work together on a particular theme, maybe switching to 100% renewable energy. There you could actually raise and get to the level where you could develop a large enough concept that a financial investor would find attractive. The problem we have with the smaller projects, we understand fully that they are critical and necessary, but the funding for those is still a major challenge. There, my recommendation would be speak to your ICLEI teams. Potentially, one could find smaller funding more through grants and bilateral connections between governments. So Global North government to an African government, potentially through that bilateral support, one could rather fund those. But it's a difficult space.
Oh, thank you. Zantia, could you tell us if Cape Town has been able to mobilize some funding in facing the drought? I mean, global funding or funding from global funders.
So I just need to indicate I've got an automatic shutdown in the next 30 seconds. So I'll try and quickly respond. But basically, it's about putting out a viable case. And I think that is what draws funding. And so the city has attempted to do that, both based on our track record to date in terms of water conservation and investment in our infrastructure, and maintaining a good credit rating as a municipality, I think sets a very...
Oops. While we look forward to having Ms. Limbert back, let me now turn to the man from whom I look forward to hearing the answer about money. Money drives, and DBSA approach to fiscal front loading of budget is representative of how national development banks can work with public sector funding available for infrastructure. How has this approach enabled the implementation of more sustainable infrastructure? Mr. Mobilising, the floor is yours to respond to that question.
Thank you, Luke. I hope you can all hear me well.
We do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. So firstly, let me tell you, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Development Bank of Southern Africa. But let me, in any case, introduce myself with explaining what DBSA, in short, does. So DBSA was established in 1983. It is 100% owned by the government of South Africa, even though the name is Development Bank of Southern Africa. Currently, it is 100% owned by South African government. It is one of a number of development finance institutions in the country, in South Africa, that focuses specifically on infrastructure mandate. So in South Africa, we have a DFI landscape where you have a land bank, which will be a DFI responsible for agricultural financing and land reform. And then we'll have Development Bank of South Africa, DBSA, responsible for infrastructure development and financing. And then we'll have Industrial Development Corporation, for example, responsible for financing industries, and many others responsible for housing sector. So the DFI landscape in South Africa is sector segmented, if I may put it that way. So DBSA is responsible for infrastructure development and financing. That's our mandate. We are globally accredited by a Global Environmental Facility, GEF, as well as Green Climate Fund. Currently, we have assets of just over 100 billion rands in our books. The loan book, just over 100 billion rand. And if you look at municipalities in South Africa, they make about a third of our loan book. So we're very big in financing municipal infrastructure in South Africa. So with that introduction, Luke, let me get to the question. So a couple of years ago, I think it was maybe 5-7 years ago, there was a clear problem statement that municipalities were facing. And that was, if you look in South Africa, municipalities, including the big cities, have three main revenue sources. So they will have their own generated revenue that they receive from the services they provide, from water services they provide, as we have heard from the City of Cape Town, from electricity, from sanitation services, as well as solid waste removal. That is their own revenue sources. They also receive allocations from government. So there is government grant allocation that goes to the municipalities annually. That forms part of their total revenue. The third source of financing for municipalities, and remember this is including the big metropolitan cities as well, is the borrowings. So municipalities in South Africa are empowered by the legislation, Municipal Finance Management Act, and Zenthia from Cape Town alluded to it earlier, to go to the market and raise capital for their capital expenditure programs. In other words, for the financing of their infrastructure project. So the likes of City of Cape Town are big metropolitan cities in South Africa, alongside City of Johannesburg, eThekwini in Durban, as well as Ekurhuleni and City of Tshwane, just to mention the few. So these metropolitan municipalities have a very vast revenue base or tax base, because they're able to charge for the services they provide from the communities that they service. So they are able to access capital markets to raise their own capital, obviously on the back of their balance sheet. And most of them have very strong balance sheets. Well, I mean, Cape Town is one case, but most of the big metropolitan cities have a huge balance sheet of which they can use to access borrowings, particularly debt capital markets, to raise funding. Some of them are highly rated by the credit agencies, as you heard from Cynthia from Cape Town. At one point, Cape Town was rated AAA, but we all know what happens because they are sub-sovereign. When your sovereign gets a deterioration in their credit profile, that affects the sub-sovereign. So the credit ratings of most of the cities have deteriorated quite a bit, but they still have access to capital, to private sector funding, particularly through capital markets. So back to the point, what was the problem? So in South Africa, we have 257 municipalities in total. Only 8 of those municipalities are metropolitan cities, the likes of Cape Town and City of Johannesburg. And about 39 is what we call it now intermediate cities. So they are between the big metropolitan municipalities and the lower end of the market, under-resourced municipalities. So the rest of the municipalities, which is about 210 of them, are what we refer to as lower or under-resourced municipalities. Under-resourced does not necessarily mean they are not well governed. There are some of them that are very, very well governed, which are rural towns and some small urban towns, which are very, very well run. They are under-resourced because they don't have a revenue base or a tax base similar to that of the cities. So if you look at their revenue source, you'll find that government grants, allocations from government take a huge portion of that revenue because they simply don't have enough revenue base. They have mostly indigenous communities in rural areas and small towns, which means they service communities which cannot be able to afford the services. They cannot be able to pay for water. They cannot be able to pay for electricity and sanitation. So they will get a huge allocation from government, what is called equitable share, to be able to service those communities. So that being said, those of the 210 municipalities which are under-resourced, when they get this allocation, grant allocation from government, some of them, in fact, not some, most of them, they are unable to spend it. So in other words, they get money from government and they are unable to spend it in that particular year. So if you have a problem where the municipality is receiving grant funding from government, they are unable to spend. So if they are unable to spend it on capital projects, what then happens? They have to return it to the fiscus. National Treasury wants it back so that it can be allocated to those that can be able to spend it. So that's one problem. The second problem is that in South Africa, the legislative framework is such that the municipalities have a 3-year planning cycle, what we call MTREF cycle. So they plan for the next 3 years. So these allocations, grant allocations that are allocated to municipalities will be over the next 3 years, if you like, including this year as your base year, and then next year and the year after. So what then happens is municipalities will now implement projects with this grant funding in a piecemeal approach. So they will start a project, and at the end of that financial year, they have not been able to finish it. They have to wait for allocation for the next financial year to be able to continue. So what then happens is municipalities incur a whole lot of costs, including escalation costs. They will need to have professional service providers that have been appointed for capital works to return to the site, and there is something called establishment cost where they return to the site. So they incur a whole lot of costs.
Yes.
Yes.
You have been elaborating on the problem.
Yes.
Actually, we have great expectation from your end in
all right.
the solution. That you
Okay.
have 1 minute left.
Okay, let me use that 1 minute wisely. So the solution that DBSA provided was, instead of municipality waiting for the grant funding for the next 3 years as it is allocated, let us as a bank, development bank, bridge finance. In other words, front load those grants, bring them forward. So if municipalities allocated 100 million over the next 3 years, 33 million, 33 million, 33.3 million. So what we do as a bank is we will provide that 100 million now. Upfront, we front load it so that municipalities able to implement project now in this financial year, and they are able to complete that project. So what that does is we provide implementation capacity support where engineers go help municipalities to implement this project so that they don't run a risk of underspending. At the same time, we accelerate the implementation of the project. Instead of waiting for 3 years for the project to be completed, the project, we are now able to complete it in 1 year. And what happens? You have services being provided to communities who need them the most early, within 12 months instead of 36 months. And this is in 2 sectors in the main, water and sanitation, as well as electricity. But this solutioning or customized solutioning, Luke, has been successful and earmarked mostly for under-resourced municipalities, because these are the municipalities who are unable to implement on time. They also face a whole lot of risks, such as implementation risk and not being able to finish a project, as well as procurement risk, where they procure or they appoint service providers that do not have capacity to implement projects. And the same municipality doesn't have capacity to monitor the service providers who are supposed to be carrying out this capital works. So we've been doing that program. It has been successful. In some instances, of course, improvements needs to be done. The key risks is on implementation, procurement, as well as institutional risks, where the political interface between the politicians and the administrators, who are the guys, city manager and his executive team, who are responsible for running the entity, the municipality, that interface between the politician, the council, must be very strong. And you don't have political interference. And you have city managers and executive team who can execute on their duties and be able to implement the capital works. So I've got a lot to say about this program, but in short, that's a solution that was funding solution that was customized for under-resourced municipalities, so that projects are implemented and services can be accelerated to communities that do not have those services. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, we only have 30 minutes left, and I have received many questions from our viewers for you. So instead of grilling Ben, because I have some questions for Ben, let me turn to the question we have received from the viewers. And Ben, thank you very much for the very one last minute where you have elaborated on some solution. I have a question to Mrs. Jiba. Will you be able to describe how beneficiaries of the performance-based resilient grant were engaged about the business activities you mentioned after the project has been implemented? This is a question from Mr. Hetherington. Could you address that, please, Mr. Jiba? You don't have, can you hear me?
So I think she's—
You come again with the question, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know with your connection problem, Fatu. You know, she had text to say she's having connection problem on and off. But I can come in there.
Nyanya, are you able to get the question?
Yes, Fatu.
Will you be able to describe how beneficiaries of the performance grant were engaged about the business activities you mentioned after their project has been implemented?
So basically, it's more related to the management and the maintenance of the projects that they have been they've implemented. These projects that were selected by them based on their needs. And then once implemented, it has to be managed and sort of maintenance for the sustainability of it. So this is where the continuation of those business activities come in. For example, those that, you know, go for borehole, for example, you know, we also provide skill sets training in terms of solar maintenance, knowing that, you know, the solar aspect of it is very critical for the management of those projects. So we, in addition to providing these performance grants for them to implement, we also provide them with skill sets that would enable them manage this, and then they could just expand their businesses from the community. So instead of having an outsider to maintain these projects for them, they themselves you know, would continue maintaining it and then get more resources from that within the communities.
Thank you. And to Marieke, do you have some inspiring examples of transformative infrastructure projects that are emerging from tap pipeline?
Oh, we've seen some wonderful projects. I think what is interesting is the diversity of projects. Many of them deal with a particular sector. So the bulk of the projects we've seen look at the transport and energy and building sector, but there are also wonderful projects dealing with agriculture and forestry. Wow, this is difficult. Maybe one of the projects from Brazil, since we now have a colleague from Brazil, the city of Recife, also an urban-led city, by the way, that was mentioned, the project that was mentioned earlier. They have a very interesting, huge river, also similar to the Gambia example, of course, with all associated issues with rivers. The Caripape Park is around the river, and they wanted to renovate and redesign the space to make it accessible to the public, but also to deal with issues like flooding, but making it a space that is more useful for the community in terms of just general use. So it's a massive project, and they've split it up into different phases. One of the phases is actually receiving funding through the Jeff funding, which was a success story, but they of course have many more different pieces. So the project is still in the pipeline, and we're trying to seek for finance for the different phases to unroll and unlock spaces. Other projects, maybe I'm a huge fan of renewable energy. So the renewable energy projects in the space typically would deal with like street lighting or upgrading hospitals, infrastructure that is owned or supported by the local government, where there's clearly a need to make the system more resilient. So if we look at buildings, the construction of buildings, rebuilding, refreshing, refurbishing buildings, looking at the impacts of climate change so that the buildings are more resilient and that they are adapted to the impacts of climate change, as a couple of examples. But take a look at the website, tappotential.org. You can see some great examples there from the north and the south. And again, share your projects with us. We're happy to help you try and access finance and technical assistance.
Thank you, Marieke. A question to Jose. You have mentioned three financial systems, and one of the viewers said he could not really understand the two others that you have mentioned, plus the one that is a local funding system. What are the two other systems that you have elaborated on?
Yes, the first system is basically self-financed and make economic sense, and then people just engage in those kinds of projects in everyday life. You see in informal. The other two is a difference. This I think from the examples I showed in the survey. Some of those projects basically they make economic sense, but not. People didn't have the financial means to invest in those projects to make it happen. And then it needs some kind of credits from private, but most of the time from outside, like higher levels of government international organizations. And the third kind of projects is kind of, you need alternative ways of finance it, in general through payment for ecosystem service or some kind of taxes, carbon credits, things that make it viable both economically and financially. And then I have seen in case of innovations that look for these, the examples we just saw, some of these last two projects. I mean, they had the idea, but they have to find a way to partner with others to make it viable financially. You know? And then the other two is kind of, you need to actually engage with other actors, banks, high levels of governments, or carbon markets, or create innovative mechanisms of sharing revenues to make it happen.
Do you think that payment for ecosystem services or even carbon market can work for under-resourced municipalities like those we have in Africa?
Yeah, the biggest problem, as Ms. Stade mentioned, that a lot of those projects, like you had the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, they are very complicated in terms of, there are a lot of transaction costs. You need to develop projects, and sometimes for small initiatives, it is not viable. But the idea we could partner with other cities and make it happen. I've seen these in countries where, for example, cities partner with the others for the water reservoir and create a consortium for payment for ecosystem service. You know? And then you have seen the part of the vegetation around it being financed by a carbon initiative. You know? For example, this kind of projects, they may be viable if you kind of be able to scale up to make the transaction cost not that heavy for a small initiative. No?
Well, thank you. Ben, we all agree that institutional risks are so common in Africa regarding resource mobilization, especially going to the banking system for municipalities in Africa. How have you been, or DBSC has been addressing the institutional risk, and to what extent your solution could be shared and actually used elsewhere?
So thanks, Luke. So institutional risk is one of many risks that we look at. As you know, we are the financing institution. So in addition to credit risks, in addition to implementation, we look at institutional risks. So what we have done as part of contracting that we do with municipalities when we provide them with financing, we require that certain legislation has been followed, particularly the supply chain management legislation, because that's where most of the things go wrong. So the council itself has to provide a letter to us of a clear resolution that has been taken to implement a specific project, and that the executive team led by the municipal manager or city manager has been given permission to enter into the contract. So we make sure in all of our contracting that we follow the Municipal Finance Management Act. In instances where Municipal Finance Management Act has not been followed, we certainly do not provide financing, because that will be promoting unlawfulness. So that's part of the things that we do. We also look at what we call PEPs, politically exposed persons. To what extent is the entity that we are financing having politically exposed persons being directly involved in the project, and how are they going to benefit? So we do our own independent assessment of that, and if the outcome is such that we are taking too much risk on this, and the funding we provide may not necessarily end up going to the project that is supposed to be going to, but somewhere else, then we don't provide financing. So in our due diligence process, the institutional assessment framework is the one that we also pay attention to. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. I still have more questions, but let me maybe take one more. That one will be for Zantia. Regarding the water bonds. The water bonds is quite an interesting scheme for all stakeholders of a water catchment. And to what extent it has benefit, let's say, the farmers, because sometimes farmers in the hinterland of a city may be using the same water catchment, and the way they use it may also impact the quality of the water being used by the city and the water plant that they may need to build. So to what extent the water bond has been actually used and transformed the way farmers have been managing agriculture near the city?
Well, the water fund essentially allows for shared accountability in order to ensure that there is benefit for all users within the system. That includes municipalities as well as agriculture, which are the largest users or consumers within the Western Cape water supply system, which is where the city of Cape Town draws its water from. And so the collective contribution towards the fund means that there's also shared risk. And in that way, there is a greater, I think, commitment towards ensuring that we realize those shared benefits for all of the users within the system. The water fund is also, I think, effective because, you know, the catchments where we draw water from are incredibly large, and both operational and capital investment in managing all those catchments are incredibly expensive, even just for the National Department of Water and Sanitation to carry on its own. But the collective contribution, not only from agriculture, municipalities, but also most importantly, commerce that draw and benefit from the shared resource, allows for a far greater investment into the optimal management of our catchments, and also assists with realizing benefits far more sooner, because we can ramp up implementation with increased funding through this particular fund. And so collectively, there is a win-win essentially solution for all of the users that are dependent on the shared resource, and that is also the agriculture sector, bearing in mind that they are already quite vulnerable at this stage, because the drought was so severe and extreme that farmers were, you know, substantially restricted in terms of their water consumption, and that did impact their revenue generation ability over the last couple of years. So farmers are already in quite a strenuous position, and collective funding models such as the water fund that's been established assists and supports other users within the system that aren't necessarily able to carry the full burden, but are dependent on the shared resource. So it's a model of shared accountability, shared risk, but maximum benefit, because you are maximizing on a collective pool of different sources of funding to ensure that we are able to maximize runoff from rainfall during our rainfall period.
Well, thank you very much. I owe an apology to all those who have been sending questions, and unfortunately, we don't have time left to address them. Question like, and that question is for Ben. Can you please give example of implementation capacity? Does this apply to capacity development for local people as well as professional? Another question is, can you please give an example of a successful municipality project that you have funded both in electricity and water and sanitation space? And other questions, well, I apologize for not having time left to give the floor to our very terrific panelists to address those questions. I just want to thank you all for being part of this session. I want to congratulate our panelists for their contributions and elaborating on aspects that I hope will drive each one of us taking home those cases they have shared with us. and in learning to learn from our next door city managers instead of being extrovert and hoping to see examples coming from, Bonn or Singapore. So congratulations to you all, and let me now hand over to Paul for some housekeeping information. Paul, the floor is yours. And thank you again, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Luke. And I wish to extend on behalf of ICLEI Africa heartfelt thanks to Luke, yourself, for moderating this conversation, as well as to our esteemed panelists for joining us. I know I've learned a lot and have been scribbling notes as we proceed. I'd just like to reflect briefly on some of the key points made, starting with José's offering of how we can widen the opportunity to achieve local and global sustainability through learning. The follow-on from Madam Jiba on Gambia's approach to skills building, particularly in financial literacy in projects, moving into a Cape Town experience from Alderman Xanthia Limburg on how we de-link water rates from consumption, and some really great follow-through on how the strategies are turning into practice with finance. Hearing from Mareka on the need for leadership across districts, not just across the thematic silos, and the need for transformative infrastructure processes, and this tension again between large projects and small projects being important to drive. And finally, from Ben Mokhoseng, sharing an innovation in offering upfront funding to support governments in properly delivering on large-scale projects, even if the allocation that arrives each year within a budget timeframe is small. So thank you very much again. I'd like to thank our Urban Leds project for sponsoring the session, as well as the UNCDF for coming on as content co-curators with us. Heartfelt thanks. From our side, we invite you to join us on the LoCS platform to engage in the social lounge and to see what further sessions are up.